What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Newby of 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with some Philly sports talk. And today I've got a great guest coming in. Going to talk to Kevin Cooney of the Associated Press, who's also a part-time host at 97.5 The Fanatic, and we've worked together a few years now at the station. The show's going to start with some Flyers talk, but I'll transition to Phillies talk and a scenario you might not have thought about with Ranger Suarez before we get to Kevin and ask him some questions. So he'll come on in a little bit and talk mostly Phillies, but I'm going to hit him with the sports radio question that I've asked some of my guests throughout this show. And I think Kevin offers a really unique perspective because he's been in a lot of different realms of sports media, and he didn't come to sports radio until a little bit later in his career. But first, let's get to the ice. That's right, we're going to do some hockey talk, so fast forward if you're one of those people that hates talking hockey, especially on sports radio.
I hate hockey and I don't like kids.
Two things now that the Flyers have gained a little bit of momentum here. I want to talk about Travis Sanheim and how he's emerged, and I also want to talk about Erik Johnson, the guy who just played his 1,000th NHL regular season game, and how much I've enjoyed covering him. And that Erik Johnson topic is also going to tie into everybody's favorite topic, Matvei Michkov, because this is outstanding what this guy's doing right now. Travis Sanheim, first off, though, is playing the best hockey of his career. He's got 5 goals and 7 assists in 19 games, but I think that says less about what he's meant to the offense as a whole. I think he really drives play for the Flyers this year. He can carry the puck as well as anybody on the team. He's got that long, athletic stride. He's got great size, and that's always been the case with the raw tools, but especially this year, I think he's put it all together. There's been stretches in other seasons where Sanheim's gotten hot, and he's also been one of those every other year guys where he's had stretches of his career where he can't seem to get a grip on defensive awareness. But his usage this season is all the way up as the Flyers' number one defenseman. He's up towards 30 minutes a game since Cam York left the lineup, and he's even playing some power play now too. They have York and Jamie Drysdale and Emil Andre all out of the lineup, so that's kind of forced Sanheim into a bigger role, but he's really taken advantage of it, and he's maybe the best player on the Flyers this season, depending on how you feel about Matvei Michkov's all-around game. But Tim Saunders and Todd Fedoruk were talking on the team broadcasts on The Fanatic the other night about the number of scoring chances that Sanheim was producing in the game against the Sabres. He just came out red hot in the first period. He seemed like every shift he was getting a shot on goal or some kind of high-danger scoring chance. Then he finally broke through, and the two announcers, Saunders and Fedoruk, really gushed over him. After that game against the Sabres on Saturday night, John Tortorella talked about Sanheim and how he's evolved in the 3 seasons since Tortorella took over as Flyers head coach.
You know how I felt about him my first year. I did not see any of this, and I hope Hockey Canada is watching, because if that guy isn't on that team, when they pick that team, I'm not sure what the date is, he's just been so impressive. You watch him play, but just how he carries himself. And I know I always talk about that, but I think that's very important to how the players present themselves, and he's taken off. He's got a level of confidence that is just, it's outstanding. I watched him turn around. I watched Yorkie, my first year with Yorkie. I don't know if he wanted to play in the National Hockey League the way he was to me, but Sandy's just taking it to a different level.
So he's saying, you know what I thought about him that first year. If you remember back to that season, it was 22-23. Tortorella really challenged a lot of guys, and some of them didn't make it, but his challenge to Travis Sanheim came in Calgary, of all places. He played for the Calgary Hitmen of the WHL, and he's got a lot of ties to the area. When the Flyers played the Flames on the road, Tortorella sat Sanheim, and he had some family and friends in the crowd. That was a big deal to a lot of people at the time. Travis Sanheim was already a veteran defenseman, but Tortorella wasn't happy with how he was asserting himself, and you heard him talk at the end of that clip how much he prioritizes that with his players. He likes them to carry themselves with confidence. He likes them to go out on the ice and think that they're going to dominate. He wants that to be a mental aspect of the game as much as anything. But Travis Sanheim has developed maybe as much as any player under Tortorella in this 2+ seasons. Now he's at the beginning of his 3rd season. But one thing that's been discussed in the time that Tortorella's taken over is this idea of a roamer, an offensive defenseman. And this came up mostly when he was the coach back in Columbus. They had Zach Werenski at the beginning of his career, and that's what Tortorella talked about, the roamer position a lot. Defensemen have defensive responsibility. That doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out. But what Tortorella thinks about some of these guys is that he wants them to learn the basis of defensive structure and play a responsible game. But once they have that, they later get that greater freedom to go make things happen on offense. Tortorella doesn't like for defensemen to sit back and let the game come to them. He doesn't like defensemen to skate backwards for too long when opponents have the puck. He wants defensemen to close that gap, to take the puck and send it the other way, and especially with Sanheim. I talked about that big athletic stride and what a great skater he is. Sanheim can carry the puck on his own. There's puck movers on the blue line in the NHL, some of the most valuable players in the modern game, but Sanheim can even carry alone, and I think he's been most confident lately of really driving that offensive game, and the Flyers' top units have really benefited from that assertive play that Travis Sanheim has shown lately. But that's one of the advantages of John Tortorella coaching, and it's been something that's been talked about on this show and slammed on other shows from outlets I may or may not work for. But Sanheim was asked on Saturday night after that big game that he played how the effect of John Tortorella has impacted his career and how that relationship has progressed in their 3 seasons together. Take a listen to what Sanheim had to say in the locker room after the victory against Buffalo.
Do you feel you're getting all these minutes, you're getting these opportunities? Do you feel like you've earned the trust of the coaching staff here? And it's been a little bit of a rocky road, but do you feel like Torts looks at you and says, just go?
Yeah, I think we're at that point in our relationship. I think obviously early on there's a lot in my game that I needed to figure out. Maybe I didn't quite understand it at the time, but you know what? It was really good for me, and the place that I'm in right now, I feel, like I said, I'm feeling the best that I've ever have, and I think he understands that and recognizes it and allows me just to go out and play, and I think he feels pretty comfortable in the style that I'm playing.
So this, to me, has a lot to do with the player's confidence. Sanheim's been around a long time now. He was drafted all the way back in 2014. He's 28 years old, and I think he's pretty much finally found that peak of his career. He's one of the vets now. He's not one of the captains. He doesn't wear the C or the A, but it seems like he's graduated to that leadership group. And, of course, why you need that leadership group, big emphasis of the rebuild, everyone's favorite word, culture. Take a listen to what Erik Johnson, trusted veteran, had to say about culture.
Talk about the culture, and obviously the team gets off to a 1-5-1 start. How does the culture help the team get out of that?
Yeah, I think that gets talked about a lot, like what is culture and how does it affect your team. I think it's people doing things for the good of the team that might not be in the best interest of themselves. I think that's a big thing. I mean, you have to accept a certain role as a player sometimes that you might not think that you should be in, that might not serve you better, but it's going to serve the team better. And I think there's a lot of that here. I think there's guys that could maybe play up in the lineup that don't, but they accept it for the good of the team, and I think that goes a long way, and that's what I think really helps build a winner, and might seem like a long ways off, a Stanley Cup maybe for this team, but I think the pieces are in place, and people should be excited about the future.
When the Flyers traded for Erik Johnson before the deadline last year, I didn't really like the move. The Sean Walker trade had come just before that, and the Flyers got their first-round pick in the deal, but they also gave up a fifth going back, and they created a hole on defense, which made them make another trade for Erik Johnson, and they gave up a fourth in that one. After Johnson had I guess so-so finish to last year, he kind of did what they got him to do. He wasn't great, but he was playing at the bottom of the lineup. I didn't mind the contract in the offseason. He signed a one-year deal, but this move has been good for them in a lot of ways, and not even really to do that much with what's going on the ice, because I don't think Johnson has good speed, and again, it's a case of maybe you can just get away with him at the bottom of the lineup. But leading up to his 1,000th NHL regular season game, I've come to respect Erik Johnson a lot more. First of all, just the fact that you can stay around in the league that long to get the silver stick for 1,000 games. By the way, it's not really 1,000. This is in the regular season. I don't know why statistics don't really count playoff experience, but Johnson's a Stanley Cup winner. He won with the Avalanche a couple of years ago, so he's played 1,000 regular season games. And this is the second time I've covered a silver stick ceremony. Claude Giroux got one back in his final game as a Flyer, and that, of course, was a pretty unique circumstance where it was his last game with the team after being with the Flyers for so long, longest tenured captain in franchise history. But back to Erik Johnson and the culture aspect. I think guys like this put substance behind that culture thing when they act the way that Erik Johnson does around the Flyers dressing room. The way I see it, he really does teach guys how to be pros. This is his 17th season in the NHL. And the biggest example, he stepped up and had Jet Luchenko living with him when the Flyers kept him up back towards the beginning of the year. We talked to Erik Johnson in the locker room after practice a few weeks ago about that type of mentorship, the leader's role that he's taken with the Flyers, and how it related to Jet Luchenko when they were living together for a little bit. Take a listen to what Erik Johnson had to say.
It seemed like you had Jet Luchenko live with you, so it sounds like you were really taking the mentor role seriously here. How much did you take that to heart?
Yeah, I think I knew he was in the hotel for a long time. I asked him to go to dinner and chat with him and see if he wanted to move in for however long he was going to be here, whether he was going to be here all year or just a little bit. I know what it was like. I lived with Al McInnes my rookie year in St. Louis when I was 19, so I kind of had a person to lean on like that. So it can be overwhelming as a teenager coming in and just focusing on hockey. So I think if that's handled away from the rink, I think it makes your on ice a lot better. And he was a super nice kid, really quiet, but you could tell he was wise beyond his years and mature.
Good stuff there, and that's really one of the reasons why I enjoy covering hockey so much. When he name drops Al McInnes and something that happened all the way back in his rookie season, that was 2007 when he was with the St. Louis Blues. I actually looked it up, though. McInnes was not an active player. He was in the Blues organization at that point. But for Johnson to have somebody to lean on, an NHL vet, McInnes was a guy that I grew up idolizing. Used to always win the hardest shot competition at the All-Star game. And those are the things I salivate over. But Johnson's really stepped in and done a lot of those intangible things that some of these guys just need, like Jet Luchenko, who was 17 years old when the Flyers drafted him and turned 18 over the summer before training camp. But John Tortorella touched on that. I guess it was the day of the 1,000th game. He said during his pregame availability, he joked that Johnson's been in the league for like 100 years, and he just knows that guys like Luchenko, sometimes they need that stuff. And somebody with experience, I've always thought that the things that players say about needing to learn how to be a pro, maybe it was a little bit overstated, but at least for one season, Erik Johnson's put some substance behind that. And seeing this guy has been a real pleasure this year. He's just got great perspective on the game, great perspective on what the younger guys are doing. Why is that important? He sits next to Matvey Michkov in the dressing room. And according to Kevin Kurz of The Athletic, because this isn't something I've seen much of personally, plus there's the language barrier and all, but it wasn't an accident, reportedly, that Johnson was sitting next to Michkov, and his experience with the younger players, that was why. If you remember back in the summer, Erik Johnson was DMing with Michkov on Instagram through the translation tools. So I think Michkov's in good hands that way, and he's certainly in good shape on the ice. But if he can get acclimated a little bit better, latch on to a guy like Erik Johnson, maybe it helps him to assimilate with the Flyers better, because I know he had media availability through translator Slava Kuznetsov after one of the practices this week, and he was saying that he hasn't been doing much of the tutoring lately. But hopefully veterans like Johnson can keep playing that role, like the one he played with Jet Luchenko. I think Johnson has a good relationship with Emil Andre too. So we'll see how that translates to Michkov. And based on what we see in the ice, this kid is the future, or at least has the potential to be the future of this franchise, and if they're really going to execute on the rebuild. If you watch the Buffalo game on Saturday, he got the assist on a goal with Travis Konechny. It was a 2-on-0, which obviously that's a great opportunity. You're going to get a high-danger scoring chance there. But 2-on-0s are also kind of awkward in the NHL. I feel like it strangely sets up for goalies to get in good position. Well, Michkov looked like a trusted vet when he dipped his shoulder to get the goalie, Devin Levi, out of position, and then he slid the puck over to Travis Konechny, and that was just one of the most excellent, crafty moves I've seen, and that's exactly why I'm sticking with that Nikita Kucherov comparison that I talked about before the season started. I think the Flyers have stumbled onto something great here. They lost to a better team, the Avalanche, on Monday, but I think they're on a better path to respectable hockey this season. I think Michkov is going to really drive this crowd crazy, especially if he keeps making individual plays like he did the other night on that assist on Konechny's goal. And maybe a playoff burst, not in order, but the respectable hockey that you didn't see in the first 10 games or so to start the season that you did see last year, maybe that's going to define the Flyers for the rest of the season. So we're going to go to break now, and when we come back, we'll switch gears and talk Phillies before getting to Kevin Cooney.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time, where we're jumping into my latest published article on 975thefanatic.com. A Ranger Suarez trade makes too much sense for the Phillies to ignore. Why is that? He was one of the best pitchers in the majors in the first half of the year, and this would have sounded ridiculous if you said it in late June. Now it makes too much sense for me to ignore. Read the signs. There's indicators all over the place that Ranger isn't the long-term answer in Philadelphia. This guy's 29 years old, and he's had a pretty weird career arc, but I think he just missed his biggest opportunity to prove himself as a reliable option in an MLB starting rotation over a full 162-game regular season. He had kind of a late start to his career, and it probably didn't help that COVID messed up everyone's timelines, and there really wasn't a full season in 2020, and he only pitched in 3 games that season. But then in 21 also, he bounced from bullpen to starter, and he was unbelievable at it, by the way, but he didn't pitch the full season in the starting rotation. In 2022, he had the visa issues that pushed his spring training off schedule, and that affects guys' rhythm, but he only had 155 innings that year in 22, and that was his career high. And coming into 24, you probably wanted to see him top that career high and go upwards towards 200. But after that first half, he had pitched over 98 innings, and he didn't even set his career high. You thought he was going to become that 162-game rotation cog, but that failed miserably. His last year of club control is 2025, and he really had something to prove to get a long-term contract as a guy you can count on, but that second half really ruined it. He was great through 16 starts at the midway point, and when I say great, I mean Cy Young great. But then he fell off a cliff in his last 11 starts, and I laid out the numbers in the article, so go ahead and check that out. But especially look at the batting averages as the best microcosm. Opponents hit 199 off Ranger Suarez in the first half of the season in those 16 starts. They hit 315 in the second half. So under 200 in the first half, over 300 in the second half. And you don't ignore that because of a back injury, by the way, and Dave Dombrowski isn't ignoring it. Read the tea leaves on this one. Ranger, he's a fan favorite. Everybody loves that calm, cool demeanor on the mound, but he's not in great long-term shape here. First of all, even before the injury, his last start before the IL stint was July 22nd. On June 22nd, they gave a contract extension to Christopher Sanchez. That was 4 years, $22.5 million. And at that point, you had Wheeler, Nola, and Sanchez all locked up on long-term contracts. But then the real kicker for me was the trade deadline. So Ranger went on the IL July 22nd, and then you hear that Dave Dombrowski was chasing after Garrett Crochet of the Chicago White Sox. Jason Stark said on the Best Show Ever that the Phillies were in it until the very end. They just missed out at the deadline, and including Andrew Painter was the deal breaker. So what does it say about Dave Dombrowski's confidence in Ranger that he was going after the best starting pitcher on the open market and also trying to keep his best pitching prospect? So you had Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez already in line. You're trying to get another big starter in Crochet, and you want to keep Painter? Count those guys up. How many starters was that? That's 5. That wouldn't even leave room in a rotation for Ranger Suarez long term, and they expect Painter to contribute in 25. So I think that those trade talks were made with the expectations that Ranger Suarez is not really a long-term stability piece in the starting rotation. But then you fast forward after the trade deadline, and the injury timeline was just straight up weird, actually. You had Rob Thompson, and he just kept pushing it back. Ranger missed Rob Thompson's target dates multiple times, and these targets are unofficial. It's not like these guys are locked in for return starts, but Ranger ended up waiting over a month between starts. It was July 22nd until August 24th, and then he was terrible after he came back. He had totally lost his rhythm, and so he obviously didn't disprove the durability concern that the Phillies have with him. And was this all due to the back injury? Dave Dombrowski could have said that in the end-of-season media availability, but this is something I missed at the time. He kind of put it on the player. Listen to what he said about the possibility of Rangers signing a long-term extension this offseason when Todd Zalecki asked him about it.
Is it important for you to extend Ranger? Is that something you probably would wait and see how he does next season?
Well, we like Ranger a lot, and understandably so. And we liked the Ranger the first half of the season better than the second half. He didn't have there was a lot that was involved in that from his own perspective. But he's a good pitcher, and we're all very open-minded to having Ranger in the organization for a long time.
It's wild that I even think this myself, but I think it's probably the right move to trade Ranger Suarez. He's been a fan favorite for most of the time he's been in Philadelphia, and I would have never even come up with it back in June when Ranger got off to that crazy start, but that's what this kind of playoff loss does, and especially one with such a whimper like the Phillies had against the Mets in the NLDS. But that's the perfect topic to jump into our guest, Kevin Cooney of the Associated Press and 97.5 The Fanatic, and he's coming up after another short break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? We got another big guest on First Time, Long Time. Welcome in Kevin Cooney of the Associated Press and 97.5 The Fanatic. What's up, Kevin? Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Colin, not a problem.
And Kevin, why don't you briefly tell the audience what you do? Because part of the theme of this show is aspiring young professionals. That's something I like to touch on as much as I can.
Yeah, my job is kind of twofold. And here I get to react and listen to callers and give my input based off of what I've seen over my career, my own personal feelings and all that. When I go to AP, it's a little different. You have to kind of do adjust the facts, kind of put all your opinions aside. You kind of just have to be a plain down the middle reporter. And I try to bring a little bit of that into my normal job when I'm working here, but it's been fun. And, obviously done it a long time, and it's been entertaining. It's been fun to kind of know both ends of it together.
Sure, it's great. I followed your work for a long time, all the way going back to Daily News Live and all those years. But let's get to some Phillies hot stove talk. You hear all the rumors this time of year, and Alec Bohm seems to be the big one. I'm also thinking about Brandon Marsh too, but I want to start off with somebody else. It's Ranger Suarez, and I'm going to go all the way back almost 6 months to the day Christopher Sanchez got extended.
Back in June.
You thought ahead and asked Dave Dombrowski about another starter who's looking for a contract. What do you think Ranger Suarez's long-term future in Philadelphia is?
Well, I think you can never have enough good pitching. And Suarez is the type of pitcher that, perfect world, he probably would finish his career in a Philly uniform. I mean, he's a guy who they've invested a lot in a sense of time and energy and all that, and he's going up. But yeah, look, I mean, there's a reason the Garrett Crochet rumors are out there. There's a reason the Blake Snell rumors are out there. They're obviously looking around. They have the Andrew Painter card that's going to be coming up here in a year or two when he'll be a part of this rotation. They're going to have to find eventual replacements for Wheeler and Nola. Now, Nola's 7 years, but Wheeler's got 3. They're looking for trying to transition, and I think Suarez may be one of the guys. If they're looking to move for an outfielder or something, Suarez may be one of the guys that they look to move. I don't think it's likely, but the fact that they didn't extend him right away tells you they have some reservations about whether they could afford him or whether they are going to be able to kind of piece it all together.
Sure, and it's interesting you brought up Garrett Crochet in particular. I published on 97.5thefanatic.com earlier today, and the Garrett Crochet rumors, to me, are a big part of the tea leaves here. They have Wheeler, Nola, Sanchez under contract.
Right.
You try to go for Crochet and keep Andrew Painter. Well, they wanted 5 starters in their organization and didn't really commit long-term to Ranger.
No, they didn't, and that's kind of where it's going with this. Obviously, Ranger's going to be a free agent at the end of the next year. If they don't think they can re-sign Ranger, what they can do is they could go and make a move for Crochet or Snell, cut their losses on Taijuan Walker, and either let Ranger play it out for a year, or you trade, or you just let them go to free agency and assume you're going to lose them.
And you have to move good players to get some players sometimes, so that's why I think...
and that's why the Bohm situation is so fascinating, because...
Perfect transition,
I know.
Alec Bohm.
He's interesting because he's coming off a year where he made an all-star team, he was terrific the first half, then broke the hand, then his numbers fall back. I don't think it's talent that people will be worried about within the Philly system. It's the attitude. And obviously getting benched in game 2, and you have A.J. Przinsky saying that the Phillies have tired of his attitude and all that, and you have Buster Olney, Jeff Passan coming out and basically saying he's available, and he's going to get traded. And the Phillies have done nothing to stop this. And that tells me that he's the guy most likely probably to be gone out of here this year, because he does bring you value that you can use for other positions. In that case, if you wanted to go to Alec Bregman, you could pivot to him as well.
Sure, and that's going to cost you. But I can't believe I'm saying it about Alec Boehm, because I've enjoyed watching his career and just the way his swing has taken shape, the way he can hit to all fields. But
he has that swing that the Phillies really need more of, which is the line drives, making contact, using the alleys and all that.
Yeah, that's something Dombrowski touched on a lot in his end of season presser.
But again, if he's the guy they want to model it after, but yet they're not diffusing any speculation about him, that tells you he's on the mark. And that tells you also that he has 2 years until free agency.
Yeah, 2 years of club.
That they don't feel totally comfortable that they would be able to get him back. And there's the obvious question of where you're going to put Adam Miller at some point as well in here. That's the one thing with the Bregman talk, and I've been big on, I would rather see the Phillies go after somebody like Nolan Arenado. And I know people go, oh, Arenado's washed and all that. Arenado's superior defensively still to Boehm. And I think he could have that type of a rebound year, because you know that window is 2-3 years. If the Cardinals are serious of moving on from Arenado, one, Boehm would be an appealing piece to them of putting him in a situation as part of the rebuild where, okay, he's your centerpiece guy, one of your centerpiece guys. Arenado, yes, the contract looks bad the next couple of years, but then it's done. It paves the way for Adam Miller down the road. I wouldn't be opposed to that. Bregman's going to be longer. That's where maybe the big hesitancy is. Bregman's a better player, absolutely, but the hesitancy is like, how far down the road do you want to go?
I'm seeing projections 7 years.
I think that Scott Barr's wishful thinking at this point. Probably 5. And if it's 5, you better tell me a plan then for Trey Turner so Adam Miller can go to short.
Well, I'm glad we got to go in depth on the two guys that I really wanted to mention, Suarez and Boehm. But I want to trace backwards a little bit to some past years. And I want you to tell us a little about the older group, because a lot of listeners
you're gonna make me feel old.
Up on them.
I've been fortunate. I've been in my career when I was at the Courier Times. I was very fortunate that I got to cover a lot of great things. I got to cover Iverson with the Sixers for a little bit. I got to do Eagles games and Donovan and Andy and even Chip in its own way. But that 07 through 11 group, because I was there every day, at least at home, and we did some travel, was pretty awesome, because you got to see that group kind of merge together really in that 07 season. And I remember looking up at one point, final week of 07, and they were neck and neck with the Mets. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to win this division. And it was like, really? And people forget it was 14 years between division titles at that, and not making the playoffs as a wild card and everything. So it felt pretty big. In 08, when Shane Victorino homer against the Brewers, the slam off Sabathia, I remember turning to Bob Ford. We're not allowed to curse on this, are we? Holy bleep. And it's like they got this magic carpet ride going. And it really was. Even the way it ended. As a reporter, you're not supposed to cheer. And there were times I wanted to pull my hair out because of different things in July and August and all that. But you also found yourself in October going, man, that was really cool. I appreciated it, I think, more after it ended than I did at the time, because that group of guys, Ryan Howard was a good dude. Chase was reserved, but Chase was a pretty good dude. Jimmy was the best answer of anybody I've ever talked to. Rollins would, if you asked him a serious question, he would give you a serious, thoughtful response. Now, if you asked him a bad question, you get a laugh and a blow off a little bit, but yeah, I get it. Victorino was a good dude. Chooch, all of them. Cole was quirky, but Cole was great. Brad Lidge was great. Madsen was funny. It was a good group to be around. There was one or two jerks, but and you've been in enough locker rooms. You know who the jerks are. The thing that sucked afterwards was after 11, that locker room changed. And guys who were not so much into the culture of the team took over. And Papelbon, Delman Young.
I think people could have guessed before you said
Marlon Byrd, Papelbon, Delman Young. Ken Giles was not great because he got influenced by Papelbon. Cliff at the end was not necessarily the best guy to be around. That culture changed. It went into some real bleak years there. It made you appreciate what you had before more.
Okay, and last question before we get you out of here. And in a weird way, I think we might have.
You did not even mention the Embiid. You
answer.
did, yeah. Well, no, and you didn't even mention the Embiid Marcus Hayes thing from a couple weeks ago, which everybody is wanting to talk to me
Well,
about.
I was going Phillies, but hey, you can fire off about that one. You saw it firsthand, right?
Yeah, I saw it firsthand. The thing that got me is that in a baseball locker room, we used to have 3 or 4 of them a year. Mm-hmm. Now, the funniest part is the guy, the Sixers security guy, and I felt bad for the PR staff. Sixers security guy who's yelling at us as we're all walking out the door. Now, nobody print this. Nobody write about this. It's like, yeah, okay,
Fat
whatever.
chance.
Yeah. If he doesn't lay the finger on Marcus, nobody writes about it. It's just the guy screaming at another guy. Is it a curiosity? Yeah. It's one of those, and you've been in enough press boxes that there's the gossip. But the minute he laid the finger on him, he had to write about it.
I'm down there with John Tortorella. I've heard it before.
Yeah, look, Torts is I mean, I haven't been around Torts since last year, but yeah, Torts could be that way.
So one thing I've asked to Kincaid when he came on, and Marissa Magnotta from Preston and
Right.
Steve got it too. I asked them, pick one team from any era of that franchise. Look back on how that era captivated Philadelphia in your memory and tell the story of that era the way you remember it. And the reason I was saying I kind of stole your answer because maybe it was those Phillies teams that you already touched on.
and I was close enough to where, yeah, my favorite Phillies team of all time was 93 because I was 19 years old. I joked. I occasionally see Crocker in the press box. I go, I had my first beer to you. Basically, I could say that now. I think the statute of limitations has passed. But yeah, I mean, that was...
I was 16 at the 08 parade. I wasn't exactly following all the rules.
All the rules that day? But no, that era. The Eagles... As great as 17 was, and I had just gotten laid off in 17, the Courier had cutbacks, and often joked that the thing that I got laid off the Friday before the opener, and we were all supposed to go to D.C., and I went, thank God I don't have to go to FedEx. I mean, that was basically my only reaction. Not thinking that the Eagles were on their way to Minneapolis on a Super Bowl run. The Eagle era that is most special to me is the one I grew up with, which was Buddy, with Randall and Reggie and Jerome and Keith Jackson and Mike Quick and Chris Carter for a little bit. Like, that's still my favorite era of Eagle football. And the fact that Buddy was not good head coach robbed them of what should have been a Super Bowl win. The Flyers, 85 and 87. I was 1 and 2 years old when they won the Cups back in 74 and 75. That 85 and 87 team, especially 87, I cried.
Ron Hextall.
Yeah, Hextall,
Right.
Poulin, Doug Crossman, Brad Marsh, Tim Kerr didn't play in the finals. They had so many guys, Brian Propp. They had so many guys who were so injured, and they found a way to get to the finish line. It was pretty cool. And I remember when they lost in Edmonton in Game 7, crying like a baby. 13, 14 years old, and just like never realizing that that's as close as they've come since then.
Yeah, and arguably the greatest hockey team of all time, the Gretzky era, Edmonton Oilers there.
And you see, I like the NBA. Being around Allen was different. It was fun. He actually is a pretty good dude. He was jaded about everybody because of his background, in a sense of he felt he didn't know who to trust necessarily. But Allen, when you got to know him, was a pretty decent dude from what I can gather, at least I'm not claiming to be Allen's best friend. I'm just saying that just being around them, when he knew you were a regular and you weren't going to be a flamethrower, he was a good dude. And so that group... Probably, it's not been a great year of Sixer basketball. I'll tell you the other thing, Colin. I love college basketball. I do. I love those St. Joe's teams in 04-05 with Jameer and Delonte West and Pat Carroll and with Martelli as the head coach. I actually saw Martelli over the weekend at a funeral. And then, obviously, got to cover Nova down in Houston with maybe the greatest college basketball game ever played against Carolina.
Well, Kevin, thanks a lot for joining us today. Can you
Appreciate
tell
it,
the audience, we know to find you on 97.5 The Fanatic. Where else would you like to share where we can find your work?
Associated Press for the written stuff. I usually parachute in about 5-6 times a month into right now Sixers it would be. And I'll also I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky and all the social media outlets depending on where everybody is at this point. Usually give my opinion, and I never like say something just to say it. I always believe everything I say, but sometimes I get a little of the Irish up in me. So, and
Only about Nick Sirianni, though, right?
yeah, well, it's kind of tough on me to rip them these days, but I'm sure I'll have my other chances. So,
Okay, Kev, thanks a lot
Thanks,
for
Colin.
taking a few minutes.
Not a
for
problem.
us. Awesome work from Kevin Cooney there, great veteran of the sports media industry. He's a guy I've enjoyed working with at 97.5 The Fanatic over the last couple of years, and had a quick story about Red October this year. Well, the listeners already know how much I was excited for maybe a memorable run, and as part of that, I put up a photo gallery on 975thefanatic.com trying to promote a lot of our hosts and their history with the sport of baseball and the Phillies in general. Well, I put a text out to a lot of people, and you know how those things are. They don't always get the best responses. Kevin Cooney gets back to me right away, sends me pictures from the 2008 parade, picture of him presenting the Baseball Writers Association of America Award to Ryan Howard. And it meant a lot to get so much history from that 07 to 11 era from a guy who was covering it on site. And that's something I've always liked about Kevin, that he participated in that, and he's always willing to participate in any efforts to promote the station and to help somebody like me out on this show. So give your reactions to anything and everything that Kevin Cooney said, or anything and everything that I said, in the comments section on Spotify or Apple, and I will talk to all of you next week. Thanks for listening, Philadelphia. I'll be back on First Time, Long Time.